Well, making pictures those days was pretty much a home cooking proposition. In other words, if you needed a kid to play in the thing, you'd say, well, who's got a kid? And they'd bring one down, you know. And I lived up on Franklin Circle with my family, and they needed a kid to play a brat in this picture, doing a lot of slapping and a lot of kicking and a lot of torturing of poor Charlie. And my old man brings me down, and I was a well-brought-up kid and a gentle child, and I was not a great slapper of people. And so when it came time to start slapping people, I didn't want to do it. I said, I don't want to slap, I don't want to hit Uncle Charlie. You know, I was a gentle kid. And poor Charlie couldn't get me to slap him until finally he and Sydney were playing slapping games. They were saying, Sydney, hit me again. And Sydney would give him a shot. And Charlie said, oh, it's so much fun. And oh, I just love it. And when he's hitting himself. And he finally convinced me that slapping was a great charge to him, you know. So I think I might have gotten into the swing of it later on.
Hollywood, 1918. Arriving at his own studio as the most successful film director in the business.
And times when I was at the studio and he would arrive, Alf Reeves would shout, "He's here!" And I think that's the only time I ever heard that, in the theater, amongst show people, or on sets, film sets, or anything. He's here. Like the prince has arrived.
On this backlot, and on his 2 stages, Chaplin would produce his greatest work. He now had complete control over the making of his films. He even had his own laboratory. But he was still answerable to his distributors. First National had paid him $1 million for 8 pictures, with no time limit. He'd taken 2 years to make 4. With independence, he had slowed down. The hectic pace of the mutuals, 12 films in 16 months, had given way to an atmosphere of relaxation. Rehearsing with the company, who would stay with Chaplin for years. These shots appear to be genuine glimpses of Chaplin at work. But no, they were staged for a film Chaplin tried to slip into his First National contract. First National rejected it. They were worried, for he was spending month after month on a mysterious film with a child actor named Jackie Coogan, the Kid. Slate 1775, the only fragment of the rushes to survive. Chaplin was using more and more of First National's money, and the film was growing longer and longer.
He had an idea, and he just developed an idea from an idea from an idea. It was strictly a cuff-a-tone, off the cuff. And they're little vignettes. They're all hung together by a small gossamer web. And he was successful in weaving that.
He was weaving gags together with dramatic scenes, pioneering a new type of comedy of feature length. But to First National, he was behaving like the character in his own film.
Here we are into a big production. It's going to be 6 reels. It's already taken 5-6 months. And no story. Just little bits of a story. And with only Chaplin there to solve what the key to the story is.
Chaplin was given advice: invite the First National exhibitors to the studio.
They came in a body. I think they were going to lynch him. And he knew what was going on. I mean, you know, Chaplin was no dummy. He knew that the pressure was on. And he put me on to divert their wrath. And we got him wound up with a whole bunch of stuff that I did with Chaplin. We had little bits that he had taught me, and I did a dance, I did the shimmy, stuff from the old act that these fellas had never seen before. Take as much time as you want, Charlie, and he was going to anyway, because nobody could say hurry up to him.
Chaplin's independence was safe. Chaplin introduces another child to the cast, Lita Grey.
I became his flirting sweetheart in the heaven sequence of the picture. Because Charlie had been experimenting with me, putting my hair up on the top of my head. My hair was long then. And he had the wardrobe lady dress me in my mother's clothes, and I photographed quite a bit older. So he said, I think we can use her as the angel. That was in the second half of the picture. The tramp falls asleep on the doorstep after he's looked for the boy. The child is taken away from him, and he wakes up and thinks that the street is heaven and everybody has wings, and it was very pretty. And I come around the corner, sticking a very skinny leg out, I remember, in a flirtatious kind of way. Went back to school after I finished the kid contract. And I was bragging to Myrna about having worked for Charlie, what a marvelous man he was, and so forth and so on. And she was intrigued. She wanted to meet him. So I said, well, we'd go to the studio and watch him work one day, which we did. And as soon as Charlie came out to greet us, he said, you're just in time, because I've been testing brunettes for a part in the Gold Rush, this film that I'm going to make. So he did another film test on me and decided that I would be right for the part.
It was 1924. Lita was 15. Now Chaplin led his company on an expedition to Truckee in Northern California. It would be an epic, a story of the Klondike. Chaplin had never done anything like this before. He shipped up everything to make a huge production. For now he was free of First National's petty restraints. He was one of the United Artists. He told Lita he wanted this to be his greatest film. Besides the animals, Chaplin brought virtually his entire crew, together with an Alaskan veteran.
Sid Grauman, who owned the famous Grauman's Chinese theater here at that time, came down to the train to say goodbye to us, and Charlie held him on the train. He didn't have a toothbrush or a change of clothes or anything, and he went all the way to Truckee with us and stayed the whole trip.
Outside Truckee, there was nothing. The first task was to build the Gold Rush Village at the foot of Summit Mountain. Chaplin surrounds himself with associates, old and new. As an assistant, Eddie Sutherland, who recalls the trip in a 1959 recording.
I was Chaplin's assistant, so I said camera and cut. And I made suggestions like everybody else, but don't let anybody tell you they ever directed Chaplin. Chaplin directed himself.
Sutherland's first job was to organize the Chilkoot Pass.
I had got a ski club from Truckee. We went up and built the exact replica of Chilkoot Pass. We sent down to Sacramento. We bought these 1,100 men from Sacramento, all tramps from the Yolo jungle. They arrived, we had them on the road at 6 o'clock, and we shot Chilkoot Pass all in one day, the entire thing of the guys going over the hill. And Charlie turned to me and said, "Eddie, that's the greatest executive feat I've ever seen in my life."
It is always thought that Chaplin returned from Truckee after shooting that one big scene, but a remarkable series of photographs from Chaplin's own archive tell a different story. They reveal that Chaplin shot all the exteriors on location, much to the regret of Lita Grey, who longed to get away from the wretched conditions.
A lot of snow, very deep snow, and we all had very heavy fur coats and 2 or 3 thicknesses of clothing, and it was cold. And there again, many retakes. We thought we'd never get off that location.
The crew carried cameras and reflectors high into the mountains to shoot scenes like this one. Charlie, lost, starving, finding a miner's grave. At this very spot occurred the tragedy of the Donner Party, pioneers driven to cannibalism. From this tragedy, Chaplin fashioned high comedy.
We had built a chicken skin for a human being to get into, but we'd built it the size of Pete Stitch, who was the painter at the studio. And Pete got in it and just walked around and looked like a painter in a chicken skin, you see. So he said, "What do we do?" I said, "It's a very simple matter. You get in it, Charlie." He says, "Oh, I don't want to do that." I said, "Well, what's going to happen? Somebody's going to do it." He said, "All right." So he reluctantly got into the chicken. And when he got into the chicken, he was a chicken.
In the film, the starving Max Wayne only chases Charlie around the hut. The stills show it might have been a very different sequence. But Chaplin discarded it all. This scene and the Chilkoot Pass were all he kept from the entire expedition. The location was the last place for a man like Chaplin to shoot, for he took too long. One moment there was snow, the next it was melting. There was only one thing to do, shoot it all in the studio. Chaplin had to retrace his steps. Under controlled conditions, he reshoots the miner's grave. On the back lot of his studio, he rebuilt the Gold Rush village with artificial snow made from rock salt. Chuck Riesner took over as Chaplin's assistant, and there was a new leading lady, Georgia Hale. Lita Grey, now Chaplin's wife, was pregnant. There was no hope of her playing the part. Once again, Chaplin had to start from scratch. It was something he'd often done before, but never at so enormous a cost.
He didn't care how much money he spent. When it come to making a picture, if it took 5 years, he wanted it as perfect as he could get it.
Chaplin had been Georgia's hero since her childhood. Playing the lead in his biggest picture was her dream come true.
He could make anyone do a scene. He did it, he felt it. He really did it himself. He acted himself. He acted the scene out for you, including every flicker of the eye. He just felt it, gave it to you, and instilled it into you so that you just had to give a terrific performance. He knew the one big fault of actors was overacting. And he knew that hamming a thing didn't have the proper action behind it, that they had lost the action for the motions. So he'd always say, after he gave you the scene, and even though it was a deep emotional scene, he'd always say, just before the camera would go, he said, now do this scene poorly. Walk through it. And then he would get it. I didn't want him to kiss me. The scene called for him to take me in his arms and give me a good big kiss. Charlie kept retaking it because he always retook everything to get the right reaction from me. And finally, I was in a rage And I really slapped that fella awfully hard across the face. And that was the take that Charlie took and really wanted, was that violent temper that came out when he kissed me once too often.
Chaplin's intensity when things were going well made him all the angrier when he ran out of ideas.
If he came on the set, he'd have his two hands stuffed into his pants pockets with his shoulders folded together and with a scowl on his face, and he wouldn't do a thing. And he would sit there, and he would let all the people wait, wouldn't matter how many were being paid or how much it cost. And after he'd sit there in a daze, like, to himself, for hours, he would leave and call it all off for the day. And then he wouldn't even call us back for a week until he was inspired again.
Perhaps the most inspired scene was this one.
The shoelaces were made of licorice. The shoes were made of licorice. The nails were made of some kind of candy. We shot and shot and shot that, too.
And he and Max Wayne got violently ill, eating so many of those shoes. I remember him coming home and how sick he was, and called off production for several days. And of course, we heard that Max Wayne was sick too.
Chaplin shot the final scenes aboard ship. Charlie has struck it rich in the Klondike. Now he meets Georgia again. Georgia Hale had fallen in love with Chaplin long before she met him, with his image on the screen. But he was married to Lita Grey. The marriage foundered right at the end of the picture.
The last scene was really the first time that Charlie could ever express anything toward me that was really legitimate, because he was, for me, he was really belonged to Lita Grey. And so there was absolutely a wall between us. We were very impersonal, but during the scene, he had a legitimate chance to express what he evidently had been feeling, and that was an affection for me. So when he had a chance to kiss me, then the kiss lasted way longer than it should have lasted. It went on, and then finally, and then he kept retaking it and retaking it. Then I was quite sure that his feeling for me was more than just a director for a leading lady. And of course, I knew what my feeling was all my life.
When Chaplin reissued the film in 1942, he spoke the narration himself, and he made a significant alteration to that final scene.
And the little fella gathered himself together, and James, the valet, was told to prepare for an extra guest. Pardon me, said the reporter, but who's the lady? Buzz, buzz, buzz. Oh, you don't say. Well, congratulations. Say, this will make a great story, and with a happy ending. And so it was. A happy ending.
"1931, the talkies have taken over. Chaplin ridicules the early talkies, for he intends to continue making silent pictures, pictures like City Lights. City Lights was the biggest gamble of his career. From the moment he announced his plans, he was criticized. People said he was going out of style. He was crazy to ignore the talkies. Above all, they said his direction was too old-fashioned. Among the actors on the set was a future director.
Every director has his own way of working. He was unique. The films that he made were quite successful, the most successful ever anybody made, so you have to say he's a great picture maker, and directing was part of it. He showed us what to do. He directed us by being us. And he acted every little bit, and you always felt that there was a reluctance that he couldn't be behind the camera and in front of it at the same time.
One way to overcome that problem was by his old method, rehearsing on film. Chaplin's rejection of sound seemed arrogant, but he knew the tramp could never speak. The story of City Lights was simple. The tramp mistaken for a millionaire by a blind flower girl who falls in love with him. First, he had to find the right girl. He chooses a Chicago society girl, 20-year-old Virginia Cherrill.
Before I signed my contract with Charlie, I made very clear that I wasn't an actress, that I'd had no training of any kind. And he said, that's exactly what I want. If you had had any training, you would have to unlearn it. Because I like to work my own way, and it's not the way anyone else works.
To see him at work has never been possible, for no film existed, until a remarkable home movie came to light, taken by a close friend. It's the only film in existence of Chaplin directing in his tramp costume. He shows her how to hand a flower. As he stands, he is trying to perfect that simple action. The whole story seems so simple. Yet it had to be set up in this one scene. If it failed, so would the film. So Chaplin lavished time on Virginia Cherrill.
He was a great inspiration. He gave you so much of the spirit of what he was trying to get out of you. He acted out every part. This was his way of direction. We had no script. And Charlie would simply say, in this scene, I want you to do so and so and so. And then he would show you exactly how he wanted it done. And it sounds ridiculous, but you found yourself feeling that he was you. How could he be a blind girl? But he was. If he was handing you a flower, you had this feeling that he was that person.
The flower stand scene is the first time the flower girl meets the tramp. Chaplin has placed Virginia close to a drinking fountain, but it's the chain that has caught his attention. A watch chain, perhaps? Then he selects a flower. She offers the wrong one. Conveying the blindness was hard enough. Much more difficult was the girl mistaking him for a rich man. What if a rich man buys a flower first? It doesn't help.
He didn't care how many takes he took. In fact, I often thought that if he couldn't think what he was going to do next, he simply went on doing the same shot over again until he thought of it. But he was a perfectionist, and to us it often seemed to be exactly the same, but to him it was not.
Chaplin's frustration mounts as the film seems to crumble before him. He loses patience with the way his assistant, Harry Crocker, handles the extras. He tries another approach. Charlie rushes back and spends his last nickel on the other flower. He already has the first one in his lapel. The girl is supposed to think the rich man has come back for her. The cameras turn on this scene day after day.
It was boring in that there was so much waiting. One waited, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days, sometimes for months, literally 3 or 4 months. And Charlie wouldn't come to the studio.
The report sheets show that after 3 weeks shooting, Chaplin was taken ill. He had not solved the sequence. No shooting for over a month. But the cast is kept at the studio just in case.
Nothing to do. I simply sat in my dressing room and read books, knitted, did needlepoint, and was generally bored.
83 days into the picture. No shooting on 62. April the 1st. Chaplin returns and starts again on the flower stand sequence. Now he makes the tramp more soulful, more romantic. But he still can't crack the problem.
He'd take it over and over and over again. And when he'd finally say, it's a take, we'd breathe a sigh of relief, and then he'd say, well, perhaps just one more time.
He tries changing the meeting. He's moved the girl further from the fountain. But why does she stop him? It's becoming a nightmare, one that was still vivid 3 years later when he worked with Alistair Cooke.
He once told me that Virginia Cherrill couldn't lift a flower up properly. And he said it took hours to say, look, all you do is take and you hold it up like this. That's all. But he said somehow she did this or that, you see.
He managed to complete the scene, but he knew something was still missing. He still hadn't solved the problem of the girl mistaking him for a rich man. It would bother him to the very end of production. After 534 days, with no shooting for most of them, he returned to the flower stand sequence.
He woke up one morning, he said, and it suddenly occurred to him, a slamming door of the automobile. So, of course, what happens is that he goes to the girl, says he'd like a flower or bunch, gives her everything he has in the world, which could well be $1 or a dime. And as she's reaching for her change, the rich man walks, she hears the rich man walk back across the sidewalk, get in the car, slam the door, and the car takes off. And she's about to give the change, and she says, "Oh, thank you, sir." And then Chaplin looks at her and realizes he's not going to get anything back, and turns round and tiptoes away without his change. Well, it's just like, you know, water running over a pebble in the film.
Charlie was a god. You forget. Everyone forgets that in this studio he was the only person whose opinion mattered in any way.
All the pressures were on him. Talkies had taken over completely. He had to fire a leading actor and reshoot all his scenes. And always he had to cope with Virginia's inexperience.
He would walk out and he'd put his hands out as though he couldn't see, and then he would run back and be himself. Then he would be the background action. He would say, these people are crossing like this, and you must, and he did everything. And he was a dervish.
City Lights moves into its second year, no end in sight. Visitors to the studio could be a welcome diversion.
If there were stars present, he had to be the most important star. But Charlie was always acting. He was always on.
Winston Churchill poses self-consciously on the City Lights set. And Chaplin seems stuck for an idea to bring the visit to life. Back to work, and Chaplin shoots a test for a new idea: the blind girl's vision of her mysterious admirer. 4,337 slates in, he abandons the prince and returns to the simplicity of his story. This scene shows Charlie's farewell. He has given her the money to have her sight restored. He knows he will go to prison and never see her again. The touching relationship of the screen did not exist in real life.
I don't think Charlie really liked me very much. I don't know why. I liked him. I was very impressed with him. But we had almost no social contact of any kind. I was never invited to his house because he didn't entertain very much. But when he did entertain, I was never invited. I had my own life. I think perhaps I had been married and divorced, and perhaps I was more sophisticated than he saw me. Perhaps he saw me as the blind girl and not as me, and for this reason didn't like me.
She had the scene, the last part of the picture, where she realizes it's him, and she feels and gives him the flower, and well, it's a heartbreaking moment. It's a magnificent moment in the picture. And she said to him just before they did the take, do you think I might get off a little early today because I have to go to the hairdresser's. I'm going to a party tonight. And he went crazy.
Charlie fired me in the middle of the film. I was late coming back, probably from lunch, and he was kept waiting, which was not allowed. So he said I was spoiled and I obviously shouldn't be in films, and I was fired.
The star of the gold rush was brought in.
She was not really an actress. And he simply fought all the way to get her to do the scenes and never felt that he was getting them. But when it came to the final scene, the dramatic scene, where she realizes that after she has her sight, that he was the one who was her benefactor. And she feels his hand and realizes this is the chap that did all these things for her. He did reshoot that scene with me. He played the part right with me, off camera. But he was the little tramp, and he was the one that I played right with. So the feeling was right there between us, because he didn't just direct it, he played it with me. So I saw him and he was with me, and there was a complete rapport between us. loved it. And he said, I'm going to redo all of City Lights with you, just the way I did the Gold Rush. I'm going to redo the whole thing with you.
But even Chaplin realized this was not the Gold Rush. Times had changed, and he had shot far too much film. Marion Davis knew he'd never wasted. A friend of both, she told Virginia, now you can name your own terms.
So I said to Charlie, I can't come back and work, you know, because I no longer have a contract with you. And he said, what do you mean? What do you mean? I said, I signed it before I was of age. He said, that's nonsense, absolute nonsense. So I said, no, it isn't. I was 21 last week. And ask your lawyer if it's not so. And he hung up. He called back later and said, I think you'd better come down and we'll talk about it. So Marion said, now you've got him. And I went back and I got double the amount. So I had the large sum of $150 a week from then on to the rest of the film.
It was 3 years since the last Chaplin film. Silent films were now a curiosity. Yet at the opening, a crowd of 25,000 caused a near riot. Chaplin's future rested on this film, for which he'd even written the music. He was extremely nervous.
All the way down, he kept saying, I don't care if it's a failure or a success. And what is fame? Well, I don't care a bit about fame or being popular or accepted. And he kept raving on about convincing himself that he just didn't care about how the evening went. It wasn't going to affect him one way or the other. And then we get to the theater. And at the end of the picture, they all stand in acclamation, just applauding him until it reverberated with noise, whistling and everything. And then he admitted, like a little baby, I do love the public. I've got to have acclaim. I've got to be accepted by people. And he was himself. He admitted that he needed the applause of the world. He lived on it. He loved it.
Charlie has served his sentence, but all he has endured is about to be rewarded. Thanks to him, the girl's sight has been restored. She works in a flower shop, wondering when her benefactor will call and what he will look like.